imagination. Nor did he notice that essentially the whole world around him had come to a standstill because it too was waiting to see what he would do next. Oh, sure, cars moved along the streets and flies buzzed their mad circles in the air, but all of them, the flies, the drivers in the cars, the molecules in their lungs, everything and everyone had turned to Simon Hayden to witness what he would do next. He made to speak. We must give him that. Stirring words came to the man, perfectly right for the moment. The right words, the ideal tone of voice. He was all ready to go. He started to speak, but then discovered that he no longer had a mouth. He worked his mouth up and down, or rather the skin on his face where his mouth had previously been. It stretched, it moved, but that was only because it was skin and he was working the muscles beneath it. Muscles that should have controlled the mouth, but he did not have one anymore. He had only skin there. Smooth, flat skin like the long expanse on a cheek. He put both hands up to touch it, but that only confirmed what he already feared. No mouth. Unwilling to believe what they felt, his fingers kept groping around there as if they were searching for a light switch in the dark. He glanced at Mrs. Dugdale. Her expression made that terrible moment worse. Scorn. The only thing on her face was scorn. Scorn for Hayden, scorn for his cowardice, and scorn for whomever he was now in her eyes. He was reliving his 30-year-old moment of truth with her in the school parking lot, and this time he would have prevailed if he'd only had a mouth, but he didn't. Frantically, he slapped the space on his face where her mouth should have been. While doing that, he glared at this woman, this villain in an afro who was winning again. The only weapon he had now to use was his eyes, but eyes are not meant for this kind of warfare. A dirty look doesn't have the firepower, the megatonnage a ripping good sentence does. Somewhere in a far corner of his mind, Hayden sensed that he had been here before, right smack in the middle of this moment and same situation, mouthless. But his fury and exasperation combined brushed aside this déjà vu. So what if he had been here before? He still had to handle it now. He still had to find a way to defeat Dugdale and show her that he was not the idiot her mocking eyes said that he was. Desperation growing, he looked around for something, anything that he could use. His eyes fell on a little girl. Her name was Nellie Weston, and she was one of Mrs. Dugdale's students. The girl was tormented too often by the teacher for being too slow, too sloppy, too dreamy for Mrs. Dugdale's liking. So Hayden picked up Nellie, slid his hand under the back of her sweatshirt. It happened so fast that she didn't have a chance to protest. But when he touched her bare back, she understood instantly what he was doing and smiled like she had never smiled before in her teacher's presence. Nellie looked at Mrs. Dugdale and opened her mouth wide like the ventriloquist dummy she had just become. It was all right, though, because she also knew what was about to happen. Out of her little girl's mouth came a man's deep voice, calm but a little threatening too. Simon Hayden's voice. "You mean old bitch," said the little girl. "You haven't changed at all in 30 years. I'm sure you're still torturing your students when no one is watching. When your door is closed and you think you're safe. Remember Clifford Snotska, huh? Remember what you did to him, huh? Well, surprise. You're not safe, and some of us do know exactly what you've done. Bully. Shithead." Nellie mouthed his words perfectly. She could feel Hayden's hands on her back manipulating her, but he didn't need to because the two of them were wholly in sync with the words. What he wanted to say, she wanted to say, and she did. When he was finished and staring triumphantly at Dugdale's stunned and then frightened face, Hayden barely heard a voice nearby say, "Well, it's about time. Bravo." He shifted his eyes over and down, and there was little Broximon, hands on hips, a big smile on his face. Where had he come from? A million or a billion synapses and connections and whatever else suddenly jumped across Hayden's brain. Something big was taking form in there. Something was coming clear. He suddenly looked at life around him, at the street, the cars, the people, the sky, the world, and an instant later, Simon Hayden understood. He gasped through a mouth that reappeared on his face the moment he made his discovery. He slowly lowered Nellie Weston to the ground. This city, this planet, this life around him was all his own invention. He had created all of it. He knew that now. And where had he created it? In the dreams he had every night while he slept. He looked at Mrs. Dugdale, and he was almost as surprised to see that she was smiling at him and nodding. So was Broximon, so was every person nearby, as if they all could read his mind. A small dog on a leash was staring, and it was smiling at him too. He knew the dog's name, Burmy. He knew it because he had created it one night. He had created this entire world. Simon Hayden finally realized that he was surrounded by a city, a life, a world that he had created every night of his life in his dreams. Everything here was either fashioned by him or taken from his conscious world and carried over into his dream world so that he could play with it, fight with it, or try to resolve it in a place all of his own. At 40, Simon Hayden had had more than 14,000 dreams. A lot of material there on which to build a world. And then he realized something else. I'm dead. He stated this. He did not ask it as a question. He looked at Broximon. The little man kept smiling, but now he nodded too. Hayden went on. That's what death is. Everyone makes their own when they're alive. That's why we have dreams. When we die, all of our dreams come together and form a place, a land. And that's where we go when we die. This time Hayden looked at his old third-grade teacher for corroboration, and she nodded too, and then she went on. You live in that dream world that you created until you recognize what it really is, Simon. She said it cheerfully, in the same tone of voice one would use to proclaim that it was a beautiful day. Thoughts, images, and particularly memories shot back and forth across Hayden's mind like tracer bullets in a night firefight. Octopus bus drivers, cars that flew, big bags of caramel, beautiful blind women. That blind woman, I remember her now. I remember the dream of mine that she was in. She was always saying the same thing again and again. It drove me nuts. I had that dream right after I got married. I dreamt. Broximon waved it away. It doesn't matter, Simon. So long as you realize what this is all about, you can fit the individual pieces together later. Hayden said in a small voice, but I definitely am dead. For some reason, he looked down at little Nellie Weston this time for the answer. She gave a child's big up and down nod to make sure that he understood. He gestured with both hands at the world around them. And this is death? It's your death, yes, Simon. Broximon chuckled. And you created almost all of us at one time or another while you were alive. That is, except for Mrs. Dugdale and things like that big bag of caramels on the bus. Remember how much your father loved caramels? Hayden was very afraid to ask the next question, but knew that he must. In a low voice, almost a whisper, he asked, well, how long have I been here? Broximon looked at Dugdale, who looked at Nellie, who looked at Broximon. He sighed, puffed out his cheeks, and said, hey, let's just say you've often had this meeting with Mrs. Dugdale. But before this, she always won, and today you did. No, answer me, Broximon. How long have I been here? A long time, pal. A very, very long time. Hayden shuddered. And I'm just now realizing what it's all about? Hey, who cares how long it's taken? Simon, you know now. Congratulations. The woman and the girl nodded vigorously in agreement. Hayden noticed that the rest of those around them were nodding too in much the same way. Even the dog was nodding. Everyone clearly agreed on this issue. Well, what am I supposed to do with it? What am I supposed to do now? Mrs. Dugdale crossed her arms over her chest and wore a very familiar expression on her face. Hayden remembered it well. You finally passed first grade, Simon. Now you move on to second. An icy chill tiptoed up Simon Hayden's spine. You mean death is like school? Again, everyone and everything there grew the same smile and looked very pleased at his progress.